Oh, wow, Alison, it's absolutely amazing to be here with you this afternoon. Yeah, and really good to hear that you are keeping up your social distancing, but being able to have a little bit of contact with your team at the Spalphabet office in Melbourne. So yeah, a huge welcome from me. I know there's a lot of teachers that are connecting with us this afternoon who are total fangirls.
I find that so weird.
I know, and maybe are they fangirls too? I know when I posted this on our page, fangirl alert, because I must confess myself, I've been a big fan of yours ever since I came across your website, which I know was in the early days, because you founded the Spalphabet website in 2012. Is that correct?
Yeah, I just was like, I had nobody to talk to about this stuff. I thought, okay, I'll just talk to the internet.
Yeah.
And wow. So about 3 readers in the first week.
Wow, that's good that you had somebody. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a bio to let people know who you are, and please chip in if I don't get this right. But you're a speech pathologist, and you've been a speech pathologist since 1988. I happen to know that you have a really interesting story that comes before that as well, but I might let you share a little bit of insight into that. And as I said, you founded the Spalphabet website in 2012 because you had a strong desire to spread the good word, I'm going to say, and to make a difference to what was available for people, both who wanted to access suitable materials, not just for those pitched at 5 and 6 year olds, but great materials across the board. And since that time, my goodness, I just feel like you've created this incredible tidal wave of
with a lot of help, a lot of very good help from yourself and others.
But still, you've created a great tidal wave of evidence-based and instruction, and I know I'm incredibly grateful for that for everybody in New Zealand. And so yeah, it's wonderful to connect with you today and have a chit chat about some of the work that you do, and yeah, just get some insight into the progress that's been made, particularly in Australia, and what we can do a little bit more here in New Zealand to get that ball really, really rolling and rolling fast. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure that I'm the expert on getting the ball rolling in the greater educational sphere, but I guess because I was working originally with kids with language impairment, and then they were like, we don't want to do language therapy. We want to learn to read. So many of them couldn't read. And so that made me do all this research and find stuff that was really hard to find. And think, oh, well, I better put it on my website so I can find it again, and maybe other people can find it. But it's funny because when I started doing that, everybody was saying, oh, phonics, well, there's Jolly Phonics and there's Fitzroy Readers, and we've tried them and we don't especially like them. So, that's it. That's all we can do. So it was really great, and the amazing explosion of new things that are available, and the way that people are really embracing that idea that you start from the sounds, and the sounds are what the kids have been using for all their preschool years, and so you work on those rather than starting from these strange letters over there that a lot of kids don't have, and they're really trying to then work backwards. The letter E. The letter E does a lot of weird stuff, and how are you going to make sense of it? And getting kids to understand about sound to print kind of approaches. And they've been, it's so exciting when someone learns to read. It's so exciting when they haven't been learning and then they suddenly start getting it.
It is super exciting to observe that. So I'm thinking for our chat this afternoon, how about we sort of start at that foundation place of phonological awareness, and maybe if you could take a little bit of time to share some insights from your perspective as to how phonological awareness and I want to say the code because I want to glue them together, but I feel like we should climb the ladder, Alison, from the bottom. There could be people listening to us who are just truly starting out, and we want to be able to bring those people with us to support them. So if we're starting out and we're beginning to learn about phonological awareness, what would be your key sort of tips for those people, parents and or anybody I'm going to say, in terms of why it's important to develop phonological awareness to build reading fluency?
Well, because the way you learn to read is you use your language system that's already developed. We hope developed, maybe not, but in most kids it's already developed before they come to school. They're talking all sentences, they can say most of the sounds, and so it's really important to then teach them in a way where they are able to get link up the letters to the sounds in their phonological system, and not try to do this thing where kids, I've seen kids who've been trying to memorize high frequency words, some of the clients I used to work with, they've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, memorizing we call them the golden words here, I don't know what those lists of high frequency words in frequency order without any proper patterns that you can actually see he and she and me and we and be are actually together. So they're trying to rote memorize them as though they are pictures. And of course, pictures are processed in a different part of your brain from language, and we know that from the 1800s when being able to time how quickly people can react was first possible. And so if you look at a picture of a chair and the word chair, you'll recognise the word chair quicker than you'll recognise the picture of a chair, because you're going straight into your language system with those sound letter relationships, where with chairs, there's a lot of different ways they present, and that takes a bit longer to retrieve it as a meaning. Making sure that we're getting kids to really lock in the links between the sounds and the spellings, and also then the meanings, but the primary route to get into that is the sounds and the letters linking together. And because the sounds and the meaning are already linked in your language system, then you can complete the loop and start to do that. The 3 things that are really important for word reading are the sounds and the letters and the meanings, and you access the meanings via the sounds in your spoken language.
And when I think about we hear all these different experts talking about what the importance of us focusing on speaking to our children and the importance of oral language, and I truly I could be completely wrong here, but I think that it's really important that we emphasize for parents the importance of clear articulation with their children, and speaking to them and reading to them. I'm not saying reading to our children makes good readers, because you've just really succinctly outlined those 3 things: sounds, letters, and meaning. And hearing the sounds in isolation or being read to isn't sufficient for us to become a reader.
Yeah, good for your oral language, which once you got the word off your page, you put it in your oral language system, so reading becomes like listening with your eyes. But the process of getting the words off the page, I think it's really critical that teachers and others understand getting the words off the page is a different thing from understanding the language. And
absolutely.
You've got to automatize that as a sort of basic process, and then you can start to go off and read for me.
Yeah, and I love that phrase, and I have a very close colleague who uses something very similar, getting the words off the page. Like reading literally is you have to be able to get the words off the paper to read. And what we observe in our and dare I say, when we have a balanced literacy or a whole language approach, or we don't yet have that understanding of those foundation skills and the impact of phonological awareness and alphabetic principle, and we're not teaching the codes systematically and cumulatively like you would suggest we do, then that's when we see children guess at words, and we hear all those prompts flying in that I see in your wonderful videos that you discuss. So let's just take a moment to think about what would some really key tips be for those parents and those teachers of reading, if we're truly going to, now that we know what the research says, what the neuroscience findings are, if we're going to tell them how and what they focus on to help to truly teach children to get words off the paper, What should they be focusing on?
For beginners, I think that the type of book, the choice of books is really critical, because if you're giving children books that encourage guessing, then you're teaching them to guess. So all those repetitive books, you know, the I see a bus, I see a car, where you can cover up the text and they can after a while just guess what the words are. Recycle those books. They are teaching the strategies of a weak reader, you know, and I know the schools have got a lot of them, so have the schools here, you know, and throwing out books feels wrong, but maybe they can be repurposed in the art room or something. And, you know, and also buying new decodable books is, you know, now is a bonanza time to do it, because everybody's prices are down. The Flyleaf online portal have got free ones, and learners have got, you know, all the apps are the Aussie ones with the echidnas. Maybe you don't want the the Decodable Readers Australia, they're all you know, very cheap compared with what they normally are. So getting them on your iPad, if buying the paper books is too expensive, getting libraries to buy them, because if they're in the public library, and if librarians can understand that learning to read, there's this process where you're learning to decode, and at the same time you're listening to lovely stories that adults are reading to you and building your oral language, and at some point those two things come together and you can read the lovely stories yourself. But giving children books with code in them that they've never been taught is just setting them up to fail. You know, and some kids will be able to guess their way through, and I know, you know, lots of kids learn by looking at the picture and guessing and all the whole language stuff, but that significant minority, you know, if we had 10% or 20% of kids were going to get sick with some food in a school, you wouldn't have that food in the school.
So true.
You know, this is you know, this is a significant minority, and we cannot be teaching children in a way that just sets a significant minority of children, and particularly disadvantaged children, up to fail. So they really need to have books that they can practice that decoding and get good at that decoding strategy, and put away the high frequency word list, or if you're going to use them in a way that goes with your teaching sequence. Obviously you want to learn high frequency words before ones that are uncommon, but decoding, you can get a lot of them anyway. It's not that many funny spelling ones.
You mentioned, Alison, about you know, some children do take words off the paper reading those books, and we're talking about those, we call them predictive texts, and we often when we're working with teachers and school leaders and helping to build their understanding, we use that notion of self-teaching. And we discuss that in actual fact what that brain is doing is it is teaching itself. And one of the things that I'm really interested to see, and I'm thinking that you will potentially agree, is that we know the brain learns to read in one way now. You know, this whole notion of we all learn to read in different ways, and you can teach this child in this way, and you can use this for this child and this for this child, is actually completely unfounded. Like, it is not the case. And what we know is that for those children who have been successful on those predictive texts, they have literally taught themselves the code. Their brain has literally orthographically mapped it, sound to symbol association. For some reason, we don't know why.
Some kids are good at phonemic. Some kids are good at it, making the links, or maybe grandma taught them. You know, there's a lot of stuff goes on at home that helps them crack the code that might not be happening in school.
But we then have those students who, and you know, I want to say it's 45%. Oh, well, that's what I'm observing across schools. It's around 45% of students and children who are having real difficulty, and then there's varying degrees within that. So,
the kids who can't spell, that is, isn't it? As well as the kids who can't read, because a lot of kids who can read fairly well, except
but they
that when
can't
you
spell.
give them, and if you give them compete and complete, they think they're the same word. They're not actually reading the middles of words; they're just reading the ends.
Which is a reflection of that way they've been taught to just, I'm going to say, glance at the word and guess, is that word this? And, you know, those words look so similar. But when they go on and they're reading a whole lot of comprehensive text and there's a lot more of it, the cognitive load increases, and then it's so difficult for them to make meaning because they didn't truly decode the text.
So if you get a significant content word wrong in a sentence, and then you have to go back and what was it, and it just destroys the joy of reading. Whereas, as like David Kilpatrick says, those sight words pop. Once you've got a word and it's really nailed and you can just look at complete and compete and know they're different and they just pop and you don't have to think about it, that's when you're really into that sort of joy of reading territory. That's the goal.
It is.
That's where you start. Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful when you work with children and older children and adults and you see it is so cool.
When they say, why didn't anyone tell me words are made of sounds and letters are how you write them? I was like, what? I don't know what you were doing in prep. And, a lot of kids with attentional issues who weren't paying attention to that bit of the instruction.
And so we know there's a system and there is a structure to our language. And you mentioned also when you were talking earlier about how we get words off the paper, you made this sort of I'm going to say potential assumption that when we're teaching we follow a scope and sequence. Now this is a relatively new notion in New Zealand, Alison. So following a scope and sequence.
Phonics sequence. I think the alphabet has always been taught, but often just at the start of words. So you learn about in elephant, and then the rest of the word. And I hate those phrases where they've got these long words and X is for X-ray. You think, oh, really? Getting those sort of alphabet phrases down and being much more clear about, there's a whole lot of sounds in your speech and here are the spellings that represent them, not just letters. And these are actually the spellings at the beginning and the middle and the end of the word, not just the beginning. And so that kids can kind of make sense of it and they aren't just relying on guessing from the first letter.
What about for our children that, they come in? So what we're advocating here for now in New Zealand is that children are screened through a quality phonological awareness screen and that they are screened in early code and then they're taught phonological and phonemic awareness systematically and they're taught through a scope and sequence and they're taken to a decodable text. I think we're making some really good progress, Alison.
Great.
But what about for those children who are the strugglers that come and see you in your practice and they come and see us in our practice? When we think about those children, what insight would you like to offer there for anybody who's listening about really trying to push through and continue to work with those children?
I reckon a lot of them, the problem is there's this sort of in your sequences, you have that, learning about CVC words like hop and bus and whatever. And then there's not enough attention paid to the next stage of actually being able to do the consonant segmenting and blending. There's so many kids who do a little bit of that. And it's sort of assumed that because they can do, mat and hop and all the letters in the word say jump, therefore they'll be able to hear but they are not hearing that if you test them on that, they're not hearing the in crash or whatever. They're not hearing, but especially those inside consonants in blends. A lot more work needs to be done on that to really nail down that thing of being able to listen through a word and hear the first sound and hear the next sound. It's easiest to hear the first sound, then the end sound. And then if you've got a 4-sound word, then the vowel is next easiest. And that inside consonant, because it's often a very vocalic kind of, it's like a vowel, like the all is like a vowel and and even is a bit like a vowel. So you have bench and jump and crash and climb, those kind of words. Those inside vowel-like consonants blur into the vowel and kids just leave them out and they're not really aware of them, and then they go on and learn a whole lot of digraphs, but they're still dropping letters out of the words because they're not hearing all the sounds. So a really solid amount of work on hearing all the sounds, listening right through the word, and working with words that start the same way but are different at the end, so that they're actually getting that. It's not just the identity of the sounds, it's the order and the number, getting those really nailed, that identity order number thing, because we're often very focused on identity, and then it's like, oh, now we can put it into long words. So you can't. You've got to work your way up to those.
What I've learned in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, it's interesting when you reflect back, because I look back at how we used to teach, and we would teach chunks. and we would teach word endings, or we would teach ing. And so it's really interesting now, you know, and so for where my head is going is about the importance of us when we're working with our teachers and or when we're working with any students, that we're really, really explicit and direct with ensuring that there is complete phoneme segmentation. That's what I'm picking up from what you're saying.
And also that kids understand that, you know, there's certain allowable onsets in English. You can't just have ZMP in English. There's certain, so practice, you know, a good selection of them. Practice a good selection of the sorts of combinations that you can do at the end of words. And also, I mean, it's good to do morphemes. It's good to say, you know, there's you know, ing is a thing. Yes. It's a morpheme, but it's made of two sounds. So have those two levels of analysis. So you're learning about word parts and you're also learning about phonemes and graphemes, and not confuse them, because, you know, the number of kids that you say write song and they write SOING because they've learned ing is a thing, and they can't take ing, or they can't take the I out and write, you know, when you ask them to write hang and, you know, hung and those kind of words, they just put an ing because that's a chunk in their mind and they think it's a sound.
Yeah. When you say that, Alison, I come back to Bill Hansberry's beautiful little quote, practice makes permanent, not perfect. And that always, and I'm always saying that to different people, but it's true, isn't it? You know, whatever we're teaching, if we go back to that initial statement of what does it take, or how do we best teach children to get words off the page, and or we could even say to help them get their words on the page, whatever we've embedded in here is going to be permanent. Like your example of song being SOING, you know, if they've got as ING, that's what they'll write every time a coconut.
If they don't understand, I mean, they need to understand. Ing is a part of a word. It's not a sound. Do sounds quite separately from your parts of words. I'm interested in how you code. You know, there's all these different ways that people code text. So usually when I'm trying to explain to kids, those two letters are one thing, I'll put a line under them. And I've started to do circles around syllables because, you know, when you have the word play and then you make it into playing, you end up with that little intermediate consonant separating the A and the I. You've got to have a consonant in the middle. So in play, you don't hear a y sound, but in playing, you do. So I like to do an overlapping circles now to try and get kids to be able to focus on what the syllables are. And that seems to be more helpful than trying to chop them, you know, because actually the word is, you know, pulling it apart into pieces. It doesn't look the same as it does when it's whole, but if you put circles around the syllables, you can kind of get them to work their way through a bit better. And also those, all those ones like, you know, where you have library and then you have librarian and, you know, those, cheery has got an but in our dialect, but cheer doesn't. So what are you going to do with that you know?
I love that. What do you, when you're doing that and you're doing the play and the ing and the ying and the y is in there, I'm just thinking, my own son has always had really huge speech difficulties. I'd be really interested, it'd be interesting to observe from an articulation perspective if you focus on that too, because often I find for him a lot of those medial sounds, there are certain sounds that are just dropped off along the way. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yes, and I think, you know, the more that I talk to parents and teachers about phonology, the more it's like, it's such an essential piece of knowledge for teachers to be able to teach well and understand mistakes well. Why is that child writing an N instead of an M? It's because they're both nasals, you know. If you turn around and say words quickly and you say instead of they sound the same. And forth and those kind of sounds, if you're not watching people's faces, they're the same. And especially I work with a lot of kids on the autism spectrum who are not watching people's faces. And so they're not really discerning those very subtly different sounds. So getting kids to really look and really feel them in their own mouths, it's pretty hard to get some kids to look. On Zoom, kids seem to be looking more at my face, which is kind of funny. The wonders of technology.
Alison, I'm just going to shout out to we've got a lot of people watching with us, and I just want to say to the people that are watching with us, if you'd like to ask Alison a question, if you can just pop your question in the comment thread, And I'm just sort of keeping a track of those to the side. So now's a good time for you to throw your question in there if you've got a specific question. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, Alison, one of the observations that I've really particularly noticed during this lockdown period is there's so much stuff out there. There's so much for teachers and there's so much for parents. And as a past school principal myself, I have to confess I was a PE addict. I was totally hooked on programs, and
scope and sequence.
I wanted a quick fix. I think that's where that came from. I wanted a quick fix, and I have a really big heart, and I wanted to help the children and the teachers that I was working with to be successful. I very quickly learned after I'd done a lot of research that actually that wasn't the way, that what we needed to be doing was to build teacher knowledge and develop a consistent pedagogy across our school. And that's my real kind of gig going forward now. But in terms of, there being so much out there, and I've been that parent who, sadly, of a dyslexic child who has clutched and paid for everything imaginable. What would your biggest piece of advice be for parents and or teachers who do support and want to be in that position to explicitly teach children who really struggle? How do they decipher between the quality evidence-based program and the snake oil?
That is a really good question. We have a really red hot bunch of women, mostly women, I think they're in Melbourne, Dyslexia Victoria support, and they do a lot of that filtering it for each other in a Facebook group, and they have smaller Facebook groups all around Victoria. But it shouldn't really be word of mouth. It should be the education department saying, these are the things work, and these things are yet to have evidence that is scientific and convincing and repeated, that sort of stuff. Now, of course, you want to have randomized controlled trials of everything, but if they're expensive and not everybody can afford them, but you want things that are consistent with the evidence, the best evidence available. Research ed, I think, is one thing that's really popped up to respond to that kind of idea that, because in education there has been a bit of a, I remember I was doing a master's in applied linguistics, and I was reading the research thinking, this would not cut it in speech pathology, because speech pathology is supposedly science, Yes. So you have to actually, make your research has to cut it in a scientific headspace. Whereas a lot of stuff that you'll read in educational journals is much more descriptive and doesn't have that same sort of scientific requirement attached to it. But, we all believe stuff without basis, but, you test your theory when you've got some sort of scientific research where people step back and can actually say, well, yes or no, it doesn't or doesn't work. So, the DDOL network is one place that a lot of information can be gotten from. I don't know, you're probably on that. The developmental disorders of language and literacy, they have, the problem is 1,000 emails and you don't get to read them all. The Spell Talk listserv in the US, you're probably on that as well, has a lot of good research stuff that gets filtered. The sort of networks of supportive parents. But wouldn't it be great if we had the leading lights of the education. I could shut my website down and not spend my weekends, fixing broken links. I could go for a walk instead.
I hear you.
So it's a little bit hard to filter some of it.
I think the other thing that I want to point out too is that you have, you were wonderful when you quickly salvaged those music briefings and loaded them up onto your website.
They would have been a terrible loss.
Yeah, they would have been a terrible loss. And I know that there are a lot of teachers and parents in New Zealand who have reached out and sourced those from your website, and then had sourced them from the university link before that did shut down. But one of the things that I'm really taking away from what you were saying earlier, and it reminds me of when I had the pleasure to meet Tim Conway in the States, and he talks a lot about consensus-based information or consensus-based choices as opposed to research and evidence-based choices, and particularly evidence-based. And I think it's really important to add to what you're saying, that we as parents and as educators don't fall into that consensus-based process to look for the evidence base, because that is what we see a lot happening. I'm going to say, even, and here I'm going to say on social media, and here we are on social media.
Here we are, yes. Yeah, but there's a lot. If you look at Teachers Pay Teachers, you know, there are some good things on Teachers Pay Teachers, and a lot of stuff that you think, okay, there's no proper evidence behind that. Or, you know, the 3 queuing system. Every school that I remember when I started working in schools in the 1980s, everybody had the 3 queue system.
Yeah.
And it's just made up. It's just not real. It's not true. There's no evidence that really supports it. So
yeah,
it's really something that we've got to kind of try and shut down and get something a bit more rigorous.
Hey, so since you've gone there, we've got to go there.
Okay, let's talk about the 3 queuing system. Stop telling children to look at the picture and guess. That is teaching the habits of weak readers.
Yeah, but first and foremost, we're going to have some people listening who are unsure of what we're talking about when we're talking about the 3 queuing system. So let's go to now, if you could just give us a little bit of insight into what is the 3 queuing system. And I'm going to go 3 things. What is the 3 queuing system? This is going to push your working memory.
I'll try. I'll jot it down. Okay. I'll put it on my whiteboard. I've got whiteboards that I wave at children.
Okay. So number 1, what is the 3 queuing system?
Yeah.
Number 2, where does it come from?
Yeah.
And number 3, why should we be moving away from this?
Okay. Well, it's the 3 queuing system is this kind of zeitgeisty thing that appeared in schools where it's sort of based on lay knowledge and the sort of theoretical ideas of that idea that language, that learning to read is the same as learning to speak. So you just need to immerse children in language and written language, and they will magically pick it up the way they pick up oral language, which we know is bunkum. And that idea that reading is a psycholinguistic guessing game, it is just not a psycholinguistic guessing game. And but these sort of theories got made up and publicised and promoted and took hold in education. And so you end up with these diagrams. People might have seen them in school with 3 circles in them. They've got 2 circles at the top and 1 at the bottom. And the worst of them go that you use your syntactic system, your semantic system, and your visual system, it says at the bottom, and the better ones say graphophonic or something to do with sounds as well as visual, and you use those things together to work out what a word is. So so that kind of model, it's sort of related to stuff that I learned in speech pathology about language, oral language, and it sort of makes sense if you apply it to oral language. But as far as word reading, which is a different thing from learning, you know, reading connected text, that thing of actually getting the words off the page and getting them to pop, so you don't have to keep digging them out all the time. They just pop out for, you know, as soon as you see them, they pop and you don't have to sound them out. So that process is a very different process. So what happened was this diagram got taken to be the way that children learn to read. And so children are encouraged to think what word might go there, and look at the picture, and still on my education department's website, they have, you know, number 1, you know, if a child gets stuck on a word, number 1, look at the picture. And then the second thing is also look at the picture. And then the third thing starts doing the sounding out. And this idea, Murray Clay was also very keen on using everything except sounding out is kind of a last resort. And why would you sound out right through the word? It takes too long. This kind of lay knowledge idea that skilled readers are just sort of skimming along and they're not actually reading every letter. They're not looking, you know, which is completely false and has been completely debunked in multiple experiments. It's like a dead issue. It is not true. When you're a skilled reader, you are reading every single word accurately. And they do these tests where you read the whole paragraph and there's one word wrong, but it's sort of a plausible wrong. And a good reader will always know that that's wrong, and, you know, it's spelt with 1 letter wrong or something, and a poor reader won't notice it. The poor readers are the skimmers, it's not the good readers. So that those diagrams, if you see any in any schools in New Zealand, grab them and throw them in the bin. And I don't like to be pulling people's things off the walls. anyway, because that's not how children learn to read. And so, yeah, it came from the sort of whole language movement and the idea of language as a guessing rather than an accurate, skilled behaviour, and observing a skilled reader and confusing them with a novice. You know, a novice cyclist, they wobble, you've got to hold the back, and they're learning to pedal, and they're doing quite a different thing from a skilled cyclist who has automatised all those skills. And that's the same with reading. So don't confuse the expert with the novice, because that's quite different. That once you've automatised all that good decoding, then you can use it in a skilled way. So that's why we should abandon it, because it's wrong. So it's really important that people have the simple view of reading is the one that's much more robust and scientifically based, where you have two things that go together into skilled reading. One of them is getting the words off the page, and then the other one is your oral language skills, which also, you know, maybe having difficulties in seeing a speech pathologist and all that. But those two things then knit together into skilled reading, but they require different interventions. So if a kid's got good decoding and poor oral language, then they need to work on the oral language. If they've got poor decoding, is the dyslexic kind of kid, but they can tell you a story and understand Harry Potter, whatever, then they need to work on their code, and not mixing those up and not assessing reading comprehension, because how do you know which component is broken? If you're assessing reading comprehension, you've got to assess comprehension and decoding, and then figure out which component is broken, because otherwise you won't know which component to fix.
And in New Zealand, probably very much like in Australia, Alison, we've used in a school-based setting, we've used a running record, which is the byproduct of the 3 cueing theory. Because we were led to believe that it would determine whether or not, to determine reading fluency and to get to look at comprehension. Comprehension, yes. Reading fluency, no. So I think that's the big shift we're starting to see, is that more and more we have a growing nation of teachers and a growing nation of school leaders. And, last week I had an interesting meeting with the Ministry of Education. I want to say a growing body of people in the Ministry of Education.
Good luck.
Yeah, who are much more willing to lean into the conversation and explore their beliefs that sit around that 3 cueing system. Because at the end of the day, that's where the issue is. It's with in my experience, it's about if people hold true to a belief and that still doesn't serve them. I struggle with that, You, like you say, you wouldn't continue to eat the food that poisons the people. You wouldn't continue to feed it to them.
Even if it's only 1 in 10. 1 in 10 children being poisoned. This is we can't have that food in our school. Imagine the panic. I don't know why we don't do that with pedagogy.
Well, we take the peanuts away when there's a nut allergy. So
that's right. 1 kid in 300 or 600. Take all the peanuts away.
And I love the bike analogy. That's such a great, the bike analogy of, we're wobbly, we're learning, and it's much the same as when we're learning to decode the text. I'm just going to go to, there's a couple of really good questions here. The first one is, what are your preferred examinations to indicate learning difficulties? So I'm thinking this is coming from a language learning difficulty basis. WISC is often a go-to for an assessment tool, but various research suggests that may not be the best. Do you have...
if I get a kid in here who needs to have an assessment, who's having trouble with decoding, first of all, I'll ask, can they understand Harry Potter? Do they like an audiobook? Do they want you to read them complicated stories? Can they discuss the plot of a movie? Try and figure out whether their oral language is deficient, and assess that if it sounds like they've got some problems with their listening comprehension. And then if it looks like their oral language is okay and it's just their code skills that are weak, I do a spelling test. The one I've been using is the test of written spelling, which is the Louisa Motes & Co. one. And then I do the TARI test of word reading efficiency, which is like so fast. I love that test. And to see how fluent they are at decoding, at reading real words and also reading nonsense words. And then I do the CTOP, which tells me their phonemic awareness and their phonological memory, and also their rapid automatized naming. And usually I can get all of those tests done in an hour. And at the end of it, a lot of kids are just weak on phonemic and awareness, which is great because we can dive in and work on that really hard, and that's fixable. And then a bunch of kids have got low phonological memory. Sometimes if they've had a whisk, you can also see they've got low working memory. And they've got low rapid automatized naming, and often you can see in their processing speed scores on the whisk that's low. So then it's good to document that, because in high school they will need extra time. And also it's good to know about the phonological memory, working memory issue, which is pretty hard to differentiate in the clinic, because it just means they're going to need more goes. When you're getting something into long-term memory, here's your memory and here's the world, and you've got this smaller funnel or smaller bench to get it across, to get it into long-term memory. So you're going to have a lot more goes at it, those kids who have got the low memory issue, and really break everything down a lot more and have, plenty of more practice. So those ones, you just, working memory is maturational. We've got to wait until they're 15 to see if they get a decent amount of working memory. Rapid naming, well, maybe the speed of your brain is the speed of your brain. So we just got to give them time.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Now, another question. Lots of schools say they teach phonics, but I have heard that there are different types of phonics, such as analytic, embedded and systematic, synthetic phonics. Can you speak of what is the best way to teach phonics and why?
Well, I think it is. Synthetic is a terrible term for it. I wish it wasn't called synthetic. It makes it sound like it's made of terylene or something, or nylon. But, there's synthesizing words and there's analyzing words. And so analytic phonics usually is about teaching children a whole lot of words and then teaching them how to analyze them. But the kids who are good at phonemic awareness will be able to start analysing themselves, and the other kids will just get lost, do it that way. So a synthetic phonics approach starts with just, maybe 4 sounds and builds up some little words, and then adds a few more sounds and builds up some more little words and adds a few more sounds, and does that really systematic incremental thing that so many of the kids who are at risk really need. And with lots of practice to mastery, and read what you write and write what you read. And, once teachers have had a go of that and see the difference, especially prep teachers, if they've been doing 3Qing and look at the picture and guess and all this kind of stuff, and then they try a really good phonics program, they're like, why didn't I know about this a long time ago? I know so many people who are like, I can't believe I didn't know that, And then they're just hooked because, those kids that would always be the sad little ones down the back going, I can't do it at the end of the prep, can do it. And, the measure of a great teacher isn't the top end kids, it's the kids at the bottom. Are they with the pack, or are they really just being left behind and being, there's not a prep teacher in the world who doesn't want those kids up with the pack. But really making sure the teachers have got those skills and the resources, when having decodable books for a start, to be able to really get those kids to shift up and stay with the class. Because if they stay with the class, then the job of the other teachers further up the school is so much easier. So, they're not doing all this differentiation, and they don't have so much of the behaviour problems that you get when kids are a bit disenfranchised by the pedagogy. So, I think synthetic phonics, where you just start with a few sounds, give it a few letters, and then build and do it fast. Sometimes people don't do it fast enough and everybody's bored, and then they abandon it because the clever kids are bored. But, the clever kids can go off and read something for a minute while you get the others going, and travel and get them to travel in a pack up through the school and make sure that nobody's left behind.
We talk about perky pace.
Perky pace,
Perky pace. The pace must be perky, because if lo and behold, we don't want to get bored, because if we're getting bored and the pace is too slow, but we need to keep the pace perky. So just thinking about what you've just finished talking about, I would imagine that you're a fairly sizable advocate for early intervention. Yeah,
so I think that we should really be screening kids on school entry for their phonemic awareness. The fella assessment we have here that Ros Nielsen has made up is quite a nice one and pretty straightforward to administer, with something that looks at their letter knowledge and their phonemic or their phonological awareness. But once you get to school, it's really about phonemic awareness. You know, rhyming is for preschool. Don't worry about rhyming in primary school. You've got to work on phoneme level is where you've got to cut to the chase. And you can work on rhyming all you like, but it's not going to be effective. It's really got to cut down to the individual phoneme. And so, yes, screening at school entry to pick up those kids, and especially the kids with the working memory and the naming speed issues. And the kids who just don't know any letters, you know, and there's always going to be kids who are from a home language that has a different alphabet, or, you know, there's a whole lot of issues. I mean, I've worked with lots of families where the parents sign with an X, refugee families or whatever. So, you know, you have this diversity that you've somehow got to manage. But picking out those kids who are at risk from day one, and then having your intervention program, not waiting until the end of prep, or, you know, here we used to have reading recovery. Reading recovery didn't work very well anyway in my understanding of it, but we had it starting in prep, in grade 1, sorry, but that's too long. That's a year of failure. And the kids are, you know, when you look at preps who can't read at the end of the year, they know they can't read and they know everybody else can. Exactly. And they are miserable, and the parents are starting to get a bit desperate. Well, let's not wait that long, you know, start in the middle of prep and with little groups, and giving them a little bit more of a push. And make sure that they don't get that far behind, and you don't end up with this big spread of kids where you're actually teaching 3 different lessons.
Great stuff. So, Alison, so much goodness in there. There's lots of different people are just coming in and saying, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much," and can we watch this later, and which is fantastic. So, how I'd like to finish is by perhaps if we think about the various stakeholders that, you know, are, I want to say the parents, classroom teachers and school leaders. They're sort of the 3 stakeholders I think that, that probably at our end we work across the most. What would be your number 1 tip or recommendation if I was a parent of a struggling reader, if I'm a teacher of a struggling reader, and if I'm a school leader who is where the buck stops for those children? Now that we know things like the brain learns to read in one way, it's non-negotiable. We know we need to be open to being challenged on our 3 cueing system, that we need to be making sure we're screening and teaching for phonemic awareness, and we're teaching the code in a sequential way. What would be your number 1 tip for the parent first?
For the parent first, I would say don't wait and see. And if anybody says to you, wait and see, then say thank you very much and go and get some more advice. If you're worried, then, you know, I know so many parents who said, you know, we were worried in prep, but then we call it prep. What do you call it?
Well, foundation. I think how old are they in your
5? The first year of school.
It's year 1 for us.
Year 1, okay. Yeah. So that we were worried when, you know, the child was 5 or 6. But everybody said, "Oh, don't worry, you know, he's a late bloomer," and all those kind of things. And then, you know, by the time the child is 8, they're seriously behind, and everybody's going, "Okay, go and get an assessment." But that's 3 years of, like, sorry, those were the 3 critical years. Absolutely. You can't wind back. So I wouldn't wait, and I would go and find someone who can do some assessment, and especially assessment of phonemic awareness and assessment of phonological memory, working memory, assessment of rapid naming. Those sort of red flag things, if they're problematic, then you can go back to the school with some evidence and say, look,
absolutely,
you know, look at this. My child is at risk, and I need a different program. And sometimes, you know, sometimes I'm the bad guy who says to the school by other parents, I say, do not use these books. You know, do not look at the picture and guess books. Do not memorize the high frequency words. Because this child is different. Look at his naming speed, look at his this and that. And if they get a report from a professional that says that kind of thing, then sometimes schools will go, oh, okay, we've got to do something a bit different, and we can see this kid.
Yeah.
And then if the parents and the school are working cooperatively together on it, that kid can often catch up. And it's great when it's a 6-year-old and they're really struggling, and then, you know, the parent gets on the job and the teachers are on side, and bang, they catch up. They're so happy. It's like, you know, fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, you know, I would agree with you, because I was that mum, Alison, who, I mean, at 7, I was told my child had no potential to learn. And then at 10, he was diagnosed as dyslexic. And now, I mean, he is the most wonderful kid, like every child. And he's got shitloads of potential to learn. But I will say that at 10, after 5 years of schooling and some of that granted on my watch, man, it's hard. It's hard. It's a really, really, really hard slog to go back and secure those foundation skills that are crucial for their success. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I am very much about not taking the wait to fail approach.
Yep. So that's good.
Okay.
And,
so
you
teachers,
had teachers.
So teachers, what would be your recommendation for teachers?
Well, you know, speech pathologists, I'm like,
I know, but
it's a tricky domain.
Yeah.
Training, you know, skill up and learn about phonology. When you know about phonology, you know about the sounds of the language, and you know about the structure of syllables and that kind of stuff. When you do like something like a Sounds Right course, or, you know, some sort of program, it doesn't have to even be a program, but learn about the sounds of speech and how they work with the letters and how words are built and that kind of stuff, because teachers don't get that linguistics training in university. Why not? We don't know. It should be on every teaching course. You know, teachers should be able to tell you what the phonemes are. But if you ask, you know, 10 years ago, I think it's better now, but 10 years ago I went around asking teachers how many sounds in English. 26. Everybody said 26. You know, it's not teachers' fault. They're just not taught that stuff. You know, teachers need to know what they are, and they need to, and if you say to a teacher, what sequence are you teaching? They should be able to answer that. And if they haven't got a sequence, then they should be able to get one, and, you know, work with the principal to get a whole school sequence where you're actually systematically making sure that you're teaching all of the sounds and all of their spellings, and doing it in a way where you don't have to feel like you've got to do it all in 1 year.
So true. And I mean, in our kind of, I'm going to say medium-term goal is that we actually have a curriculum review in New Zealand where those, particularly in what we call year 1 to 3, is actually, this is what you teach. These are the prerequisite skills for being successful. So, and this is a must in terms of what is included in our curriculum. And the schools that we're working alongside to support, we're actually writing we're writing it ourselves, because we're not going to wait for those powers that be to come in and say, oh, we've just worked it out that we might want to go this way.
But the problem is we've got, you know, a curriculum that requires a whole lot of other things. So teachers are being required and rewarded to do things other than systematically and explicitly and sequentially teach that code and get kids to the point where their word level reading and their language comprehension can meet in the middle, and bang, they can start to read Harry Potter by themselves. But sometimes it's an impediment rather than a facilitator.
That's right. And successfully access all areas of the curriculum, because we know that with reading we can do that. So if you were able to influence from a leadership perspective,
the principals,
and even anyone else who's operating in that space, what would your recommendation be?
My recommendation would be get decodable books for your year 1, your first year of schooling kids, especially. And the second, they're expensive to have enough to send them all home. But you know, there's all these free online ones at the moment. There's ways of doing it without spending an absolute fortune. But it's absolutely critical that decodable book sequence follows your teaching sequence. So whether you choose the books you like, and then this becomes the sequence, or you pick a sequence and then find books that match it. And also teacher training, because, you know, the power of teachers understanding how the writing system works is something that once they've got that in their heads, then bang, they can do it. They don't actually need expensive or whatever resources. They can get any resources and make them work. So it's not really about the resources, but the experience of using good resources early on really facilitates that understanding of how it all fits.
Absolutely. And it helps teachers to learn along the way. That's what we're experiencing, is that, you know, building that teacher knowledge is so crucial. So one last question really is that if I'm a parent or a teacher or a school leader listening, can I assume from all of the chat that we've had that how the child who flies through school and how the dyslexic brain and all other brains learn to read is going to be through the same process. The dyslexic brain may just be slower, dare I say, to go through that process than the others.
Yeah, I mean, Stanislas Dehaene and co say every brain learns the same way. You've got to get this little bit of your brain here that is, your word form area, and you link up your visual system with your language system. And some of us, it's easy.
Yes.
And some of us, it's hard. And we've still all got to do it. And teachers have got to be equipped and skilled to be able to do that with every kid in their class, because there is no teacher who doesn't want every kid in their class to thrive.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's time to sort of make sure that the teacher education and in-servicing are set up, and the curriculum requirements are set up to really facilitate that, so that every kid can get it to read, and then they can go on to succeed in the rest of the curriculum.
Yeah, and that will be great. We will have.
Hooray! And then
we can all sorted.
Yes,
we can go on holiday.
If we were in charge, everything would be so much better, wouldn't it?
It's been so wonderful to catch up with you, Alison, and to chat with you this afternoon. And I know that people who are listening in will have really, really gleaned a lot from what you've said. So thank you so much. Thank you. It's time, and it was a shame that we couldn't get across a few weeks ago to be with you in person on our structured literacy tour.
Yes. But stay home and stay safe.
Fingers crossed.
Good job, you Kiwis. Look at you doing we're giving it a red hot go, but I reckon you're really rocking it.
Yeah, no, hopefully, and hopefully the borders between our countries will open, and
then we can all go to New Zealand on holidays. I'm going to have a cycling holiday, and I've always been going to come and cycle around New Zealand.
Yeah, well, when you do that, you'll be letting me know, and then we'll be able to have you in person to come and have a chit chat with these people, which I know they'll be really keen to do. So, thanks so much for your time, Alison. Stay safe in your amazing Spalphabet place. Now, if people who are listening today have not been in touch with you before, or haven't actually had the privilege of hearing you, seeing you, exploring your website, how do they get in contact with you?
Oh, the website is www.spelphabet, SPELF for Foxtrot, ABET, .com.au. And there's, I guess, all the info is there. And I do respond to emails, but don't send me a million at once. And I am trying to fix the broken links on the website, and I'll try to keep abreast of things. So hopefully it's helpful. And let me know if there's feedback, or you find something that needs fixing or whatever. And it's lovely to have this ongoing relationship with people who I've never met in person, but I feel like I've got a huge community of fabulous people all trying to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, you do. You really do. So thanks so much for your time, Alison, and I hope the rest of your afternoon is a great one.
Same to you. Thank you.
See you later. Bye.